I never thought I'd see her again. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. One moment, you're standing at the top of the world. The next, a familiar knock on your door shakes your foundation. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, soaked, trembling, and defeated, it felt like time folded in on itself. There she was, Kat, my ex-wife. I should have felt powerful in that moment. She was the one who had crushed me, who had looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't good enough. Now she was here, staring at me, with an expression I never thought I'd see. Regret. But I didn't feel triumphant. No, what I felt was something colder, heavier. I felt the echo of who I used to be, the broken version of me that she left behind. Chase, she whispered. Her voice cracked, as if even my name was too painful for her to say out loud. I didn't move. What are you doing here? My voice was low, calm. Too calm. She blinked, water dripping down her face. Can I come in? For a moment, I just stood there, my mind a war zone. Every part of me wanted to slam the door in her face. But instead, I stepped aside, curiosity and something darker winning out. She stepped into my house, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor, the same way she'd once walked into my life and left her mark everywhere. I closed the door, watching her take in the room. She glanced at the paintings, the sleek furniture, the glass walls that overlooked the city. My house, a far cry from the cramped apartment where we'd lived when we were married. You've done well for yourself, she said softly. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. You could say that. Her eyes flickered with something, pain, maybe jealousy. I wasn't sure, but that wasn't what got me. It was the way she looked fragile. For the first time in 5 years, I let myself really remember the night that tore my life apart. It started with a text, one stupid notification that shattered everything. Her phone had been sitting on the kitchen counter, lighting up with a message from someone named V. I didn't even mean to look. It caught my eye like a flare in the dark. Can't wait to see you tonight. The words burned into my mind like acid. I felt this cold, sinking feeling in my chest, but part of me still held on to denial. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. When she came downstairs, drying her hair with a towel, I held up her phone. Who's V? I asked, my voice already frayed. She froze. For a split second, I saw fear in her eyes. And then nothing. Just resignation. Victor, she said quietly, like she was admitting to forgetting the groceries, not tearing apart our marriage. My heart pounded in my chest. Are you serious? She dropped the towel and crossed her arms, defensive. I'm tired, Chase. Tired of waiting for your business to take off. Tired of scraping by. I deserve more than this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything we'd been through, after every late-night talk about building something meaningful together, she was throwing it all away because she was impatient. You deserve more? I whispered, the anger rising. We're building something real. You knew it would take time. She didn't flinch. Time isn't enough. You're not enough. I'll never forget the way those words hit me. Like she'd reached inside and ripped something out of me. My vision blurred, and I could barely breathe. Do you even love me? I asked, my voice hoarse. She didn't answer right away. And that silence, that hesitation, was worse than any answer she could have given me. Finally she spoke. I don't know anymore. Those 5 words shattered everything. I don't even remember what happened next. Just flashes of yelling, the sound of the front door slamming, and the suffocating silence that followed. Standing there now, in the present, I felt the ghost of that night pressing down on me again. I forced myself to take a deep breath, grounding myself. This wasn't 5 years ago. I wasn't that broken man anymore. I turned to face Kat. Why are you here? Her lower lip quivered. I don't know where else to go. I let out a hollow laugh. That's rich. She flinched at my tone, and for the first time, I saw real tears in her eyes. Victor left me. He cheated. Took everything. It was ironic. The man she left me for had betrayed her in the same way. I felt a bitter sense of justice, but it didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, I felt tired of carrying this weight for so long. I stepped closer, staring into her eyes. So you came back to see the man you left behind. Why? Because I'm finally enough for you? No, she whispered. Because I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. Her voice cracked, and she reached out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back. The rain pounded against the windows as we stood there. Two people who used to be everything to each other, now barely strangers. I exhaled slowly, the past and present colliding in a way that left me breathless. Kit might have come here, seeking closure or redemption. But me? I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. All I knew was that the storm she started 5 years ago was still raging inside me. And this time, I was determined not to drown. I wish I could say that after she left, I picked myself up and moved on like a hero in a redemption movie. But life doesn't work like that. When Ket walked out of our marriage, she didn't just take herself. She took my confidence, my sense of worth, and my belief that everything would be okay. The first few weeks after the divorce were a blur of silence and sleepless nights. Our apartment felt like a mausoleum, filled with memories that refused to die. Her laughter echoed in every corner, even though she wasn't there. I avoided people. Mutual friends didn't know how to talk to me. Some tried the awkward, "Hey man, it's her loss," as if that would stitch up the gaping wound. Others just drifted away, as if my pain was contagious. The only person who stuck around was Matt, my oldest friend. The guy who'd known me before Ket, before the business, before all of it. He was the one who found me sitting in the dark with an unopened bottle of whiskey in my hand. "Chase," he said, stepping over the pizza boxes littering the floor. "You can't live like this." I didn't look at him. "What's the point, Matt?" She was right. I was a dreamer who thought hard work and patience were enough. Matt sat down across from me, his expression hard but not unkind. "No, Chase. She didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because she wasn't." I laughed bitterly. "You don't get it." He leaned in. "No, you don't get it. You spent years trying to build something. That takes guts. And yeah, maybe it hasn't paid off yet, but you don't quit just because someone else didn't believe in you." His words hit me like a slap. I wanted to brush him off, to crawl back into my cocoon of self-pity. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. "You're not her failure, Chase," he added. "You're her regret." That conversation replayed in my mind for days. It wasn't a magical fix. It didn't banish the pain. But it planted a seed. I went back to my office, a tiny, cluttered space that doubled as a storage room, and stared at the whiteboard filled with half-finished ideas. I thought about scrapping the whole thing, walking away from the dream Ket had called unrealistic. Then I remembered something my dad used to say. "If you're going to fail, fail spectacularly, but never quit halfway." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I thought had died the night Ket left. I threw myself into work like a man possessed. I stayed up late, sending emails, making phone calls, chasing every lead I could. The setbacks came fast and hard. Rejections, ignored pitches, sleepless nights. But then one day something changed. I remember it vividly. My phone buzzed while I was reheating a can of soup. It was an email from a company I'd pitched to months ago. The subject line read, "Proposal approved." I stared at the screen, barely breathing. I opened the email. They wanted a full contract. That one yes changed everything. That first contract led to more. Soon I wasn't just scraping by, I was expanding. I hired a small team and moved into a real office. Along the way, I met Sarah, one of my earliest clients who saw potential in my vision when no one else did. She wasn't just a client. She became a friend and one of the reasons I kept pushing forward. "Chase," she said one day after I'd secured my third big deal, "you need to stop trying to prove her wrong. You've already done that. Now it's time to prove yourself right." Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. By the time my company became a real player in the industry, I'd built something far bigger than I'd ever dreamed. The man who couldn't even afford new furniture now had offices with glass walls and a panoramic view of the city. My company was featured in magazines. But here's the thing about success. It doesn't erase the scars. I was on top of the world financially, but the bitterness from the past still clung to me like a shadow. Matt noticed it. One night over drinks, he said, "You've won, Chase, but you don't look like a guy who feels like he won." I shrugged. Winning doesn't feel like I thought it would. Matt stared at me for a long time. "That's because you're still looking for her ghost in the mirror." He was right. Deep down, I wanted Ket to see what I'd become, to know that she was wrong. I wasn't ready to admit it, but that need for validation was still a part of me. The real test came when I saw Victor for the first time. It was at a networking event, a swanky affair where everyone pretended they weren't sizing each other up. I was shaking hands with potential partners when I saw him across the room. Victor, the man Ket left me for. He looked exactly how I remembered, polished, smug, and wearing that I own the world expression that made me want to throw a punch. Our eyes met, and he smiled as if he'd been expecting me. "Chase," he said, strolling over with a glass of champagne. "I've heard a lot about you." "Victor," I replied coolly. "I can't say the same." He chuckled. "I see your company's making waves. I guess congratulations are in order." I nodded. "Thanks. And how's Ket?" His smile faltered for just a second. "We're separated." I felt a strange, bitter satisfaction. I shouldn't have cared, but I did. Victor's voice dropped slightly. "You know, she never really got over you." I didn't know what to say to that. But before I could reply, the conversation shifted, and Victor melted back into the crowd. That was the first time I wondered if Ket's new life had been as perfect as she'd made it out to be. The days after that event felt like a blur, but Victor's words stayed with me. "She never really got over you." What did he mean by that? Was it some twisted attempt to make me feel something for her again? I shook it off. I wasn't that guy anymore. The man who begged for closure, who needed someone else to define his worth. But life has a cruel sense of humor. Just when you think you've buried the past, it finds a way to claw its way back. And this time, it didn't come as a vague memory or a chance encounter. It came to my front door. The knock that changed everything. It was late evening. The city lights blinked below my penthouse windows, and the hum of traffic was a comforting reminder of how far I'd come. I was pouring myself a glass of scotch when I heard the knock. Not the buzzer, the knock. Nobody used the private entrance unless they knew me personally. My first thought was Matt, dropping by unannounced. But when I opened the door, my heart stopped. There she was. Ket. She looked nothing like the woman who left me 5 years ago. The confidence, the untouchable aura, was gone. Her hair clung to her face from the rain, and her eyes looked hollow, like someone who had lost everything. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. "Chase," she whispered. I blinked, every emotion I'd buried surging at once. Anger, disbelief, curiosity. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice more composed than I felt. She looked down at her hands, soaked and trembling. "Can I come in?" Everything in me screamed to say no. But there was something else too, a need to understand why she was here after all these years. I stepped aside, watching her as she walked in, dripping water onto the floor. She paused in the middle of the room, taking it all in, the furniture, the art, the view of the skyline. "You've really made it," she said almost to herself. I didn't respond. Instead, I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Why are you here, Ket?" She turned to me, and I saw it. The same vulnerability I'd seen on the night she told me she didn't love me anymore. Only this time, there was something else, fear. "Victor's gone," she said. "He left me for someone younger." I let out a humorless laugh. The irony wasn't lost on me. She flinched at my reaction. I didn't know where else to go. I raised an eyebrow. "So, you thought you'd come back to me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No, I'm not asking for anything. She choked on the words. "I made a mistake." That's when it hit me. The same woman who once told me I wasn't enough now stood in front of me, broken. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, to throw every insult and accusation in her face. But as I stared at her, all I felt was exhaustion. "You made your choice, Ket," I said quietly. "You didn't just leave me. You burned everything down on your way out." "I know," she whispered, "and I've paid for it." I narrowed my eyes. "Is that what you came here to say? That you're sorry? That it's all Victor's fault now?" She shook her head. "No, I came because I needed you to know that you were right. About everything." The anger inside me softened. Just a little, but I wasn't ready to let her off that easily. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come back after all these years? Because I'm rich now? Because I'm finally enough?" She shook her head frantically, her eyes pleading. "No, it's not that. I didn't come back for your money." "Then why?" She was silent for a long time, the rain tapping against the windows like an unwanted reminder of the past. "Finally," she whispered, "because I wanted to see if you could forgive me." Those words hit me harder than I expected. She didn't ask for a second chance. She asked for forgiveness. It would have been easier if she'd asked for money or a place to stay. But forgiveness? That wasn't something I knew how to give. I turned away from her, staring out at the city. "You want forgiveness?" She didn't answer, but I could feel her eyes on my back. "You killed the version of me that trusted people," I said. "You took the one thing I had, hope, and crushed it." And now, you want me to pretend it's fine? No, she said softly. I just wanted you to know. I regret everything. I turned back to face her. Her face was pale, and her lip trembled. She looked like someone drowning. For a brief second, I felt the pull of who we used to be. But then I remembered the pain, the sleepless nights, the humiliation, the doubt. You should go, I said finally. Her face crumpled, and she nodded. I understand. She walked past me, back to the door. I followed her, but didn't say anything. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. I really did love you, she whispered without looking back. But I was too selfish to see what I had. With that, she opened the door and stepped out into the rain. I watched her until she disappeared into the night. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence I'd known before. This time, it wasn't suffocating, it was freeing. Ket was gone, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of her ghost hanging over me. I closed the door, locked it, and walked back to my glass of scotch. I raised it to the city skyline and whispered, to the past, and to finally letting it go. As I took a sip, I realized something. I wasn't that man she left behind anymore, and I didn't need her validation to prove it. I had already won. The house felt heavier after Ket left. I stood there, staring at the door as if it might open again. But it didn't. She was gone, and the rain outside grew softer, as if the storm itself had decided it was time to move on. I thought I'd feel relief, a sense of closure after years of carrying that weight. Instead, all I felt was stillness. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Matt. Yo, you okay? His voice was cautious. Matt had a sixth sense when something wasn't right. Yeah, I muttered. Guess who just showed up at my door? There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. No way. Ket, I said simply. Holy, what did she want? To be forgiven. I let out a bitter laugh. She said she regrets everything. That Victor left her, and she had nowhere else to go. Matt's voice hardened. And? Please tell me you didn't let her stay. No, I said, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. I told her to leave. Good, he said, because you don't owe her a damn thing. I was silent for a moment before I admitted, but it didn't feel the way I thought it would. I thought I'd feel stronger, like I'd finally won. Matt was quiet for a beat. That's because closure doesn't come from someone else's apology, Chase. It comes from you deciding you don't need it. I let those words sink in. Maybe he was right. Maybe Ket's regret wasn't supposed to fill the hole she'd left behind. Maybe I had to fill it myself. The next morning, I headed to the office early, trying to shake off the events of the night before. My company was thriving, and there was no time for distractions. I had meetings lined up, deals to close, and a presentation to prep. As I walked into the building, my assistant, Rachel, greeted me with a concerned look. You okay, boss? She asked, handing me my coffee. I forced a smile. Yeah, just a weird night. She nodded but didn't push further. Rachel was sharp, and she could read people better than most. The morning passed in a blur of conference calls and negotiations. By noon, I'd almost managed to push Ket out of my mind, until Sarah showed up. Sarah, the client-turned-friend who had been with me since the early days, walked into my office with a knowing look. Why do you look like you've seen a ghost? She asked, settling into the chair across from me. I sighed, leaning back. Because I have. She raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, Ket. I gave her a tired nod. Sarah had been there through it all. She knew exactly how much damage Ket's betrayal had caused. What did she want? To be forgiven, I said, echoing my conversation with Matt. Sarah crossed her arms, frowning. Of course she does. Because now that her perfect life crumbled, she's looking for an anchor. And you're supposed to be that anchor. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. You think she's lying? No, Sarah said, surprising me. I think she regrets losing you. But regret isn't the same as love, Chase. Her words hit hard. Regret wasn't the same as love. I've been trying to untangle those two things in my head for years. You're right, I murmured. Sarah smiled, but there was a softness in her eyes. Of course I am. Now let's focus on the future. You've built something incredible. Don't let the past drag you down. That night, I sat on the balcony of my penthouse, staring out at the glowing city below. Ket's face kept flashing in my mind. Her wet hair, her tear-streaked cheeks, the quiet desperation in her voice. She'd been wrong about a lot of things, but she was right about one. I'd changed. Back when she left, I was a man running on hope and dreams. Now I was standing on the foundation I'd built with my own two hands. And I didn't need anyone to validate that, not even her. The past had shaped me, but it didn't own me anymore. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I reached Ket's name. For years, I kept her number there as a reminder of what I'd lost. But now it felt like dead weight. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed delete. A small notification popped up. Are you sure you want to remove this contact? I pressed yes without a second thought. As the name disappeared from the screen, I felt something lift inside me, like I'd finally cleared the last piece of rubble from the ruins of our old life. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. The world didn't look different, but it felt different. As I walked into the office, Matt called me. How's the ghost situation? He joked. Gone, I said simply. He laughed. Good. Now get your head back in the game. We've got a future to build. Already on it. And for the first time in years, I meant it. Ket's story was over. Mine was just beginning,